this spring, following the winter's ice storms, we met with State Urban Forester Mark Bays to learn about some of the corrective pruning to take place to alleviate that damage. Today we're going to meet with Mark again to learn about the next steps. Hi Mark.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah.
Well, we saw in the spring a lot of damage. You helped us demonstrate how to clean up some of that damage. What are we seeing now?
Yeah, we need to first and foremost understand that the damage that we saw last winter, it's going to be with us for a good number of years to come. So even though people were probably very diligent in going out and kind of cleaning up that first go around, what we're seeing is that there's a heck of a lot more that still needs to be done.
Okay.
Even here at the Department of Agriculture building where we're at today, we were hit pretty hard that day. We lost a lot of trees. A lot of our trees needed to be pruned. Some of them, we're using them as our living laboratory, so to speak. And so this lace bark elm here that we're standing next to, I just thought would be a good thing to show people some good things, some not so good things, and some things that we're going to probably be monitoring for a number of years from now.
Okay, well let's take a look at what we're seeing.
Yeah. Well, this was one of the trees that lost about half of its crown.
Okay.
So this thing, we debated whether or not we needed to remove this tree or not. Because if we think about the food production that trees have, that's where all the food production goes on to, is in the leaves.
Yeah.
And so if you lose half of your food source, then the question is will that tree be able to survive and thrive? But this was one, it was out away from the building, so we decided just to kind of let's not remove it. Let's do some pruning on it. Let's do some good pruning, some not so good pruning, and just kind of watch to see what happens.
Okay.
This branch right here that we're looking at right here, you can kind of look up all the way up here and see that that was one that we know we shouldn't have pruned that way.
Yes.
We just kind of cut it off in the middle of the branch, and we know that's against all the things that we talk about and you support on Oklahoma gardening, but again, we're just using it as a laboratory. So at best, what would happen is what you see going on right now, is whenever trees get pruned, even when pruned correctly, a lot of times you'll see those sucker sprouts grow up like that. And so that's what's happening on this one. That tree knows that all the leaves on that branch are gone, and so it's just trying to send up those sucker sprouts to replace all the leaves that were lost right there. The problem with that is it's very weakly attached right on the end of the branch there, and then of course, since it's not cut appropriately, there's going to be decay that could move into the tree as well at that point.
Okay, so what would you do with something like this? Certainly if people didn't get things cleaned up right away, or if things weren't pruned correctly, they might be experiencing something like this.
Something like this, eventually, what you may have to do is consider where this branch should have been removed. On this branch up there, the next lateral branch would be all the way back down to here.
Okay.
So if that was the case, if you had some stubs left that weren't correctly pruned, or you just wanted to get rid of it and get cleaned up, probably the best place to prune this branch off would be back down here where the next lateral, and then making that proper cut just outside the branch collar, and where that area where the cells are actively dividing, it will close off much quicker. It'll never close off up top there, and it will close down here. So that's what people can do now, is go back and take a look at their trees, come back and maybe make it a more appropriate place on the tree.
Now there might be certain situations where perhaps this is the lone branch on one side of the tree, or maybe even the whole tree was topped back. Are there going to be times where we might go ahead and try to work with some of this material?
Yeah, certainly. If there's any safety issues though that are a problem, I would say err on the side of caution and remove that branch. But there may be a particular reason, if it's just one-sided like you were talking about, or if it's you know, a very special tree to you that means a whole lot, then there are some things that you can do. And I have a little example here that I have of a tree that we just looked at here. This has obviously been not have been cut in the correct place, and so what you get is all this suckering. And what you could do then is after a few years, if the tree is fortunate enough to recover from this and you have all these sprouts, you need to begin to start selecting one of those sprouts that you may thin it out to eventually to become that branch and replace the one that was topped off. And you have some small ones here. Obviously those are just not doing well right now, and so these are the ones that you probably would want to consider removing in a couple of years. This one here, you can see this right here where it's just right at that union where it was topped off. that is a very, very, very weak location right there. So this is a candidate for removal here. If you look on the other side over here, you can kind of get a sense on this one here. Well, that has a little bit more of a little more structure to it, and it doesn't appear to be as weakly attached as this one over here. It's growing out in the direction that the branch was, and so this may be the one in the future that replaces this overall branch. So you can selectively go in and begin pruning some of those sprouts back to hopefully rehabilitate that tree to replace what was lost. Now this is better done if it's a smaller diameter branch. If you have a large diameter branch, then it gets much more difficult to do that.
Okay, and this is something you do after a couple of years.
Yes.
Do you remove all the excess sprouts at once, or do you do it over a couple of seasons?
I would gradually do it over time. So if you have 15 or 20, you might take a third of those one year, wait another couple years, watch that happen, and then through time, eventually, you know, you get down to 1 or 2.
Okay. Well, we have some examples also of how the tree seals over those wounds.
Yeah.
And we have some good examples on our living laboratory here as well as bad.
Right. Well, this is a scenario here where if you just leave the tree unchecked, if the branch is broken off for whatever reason, or if you had made a proper cut and it starts to callus over and everything starts to seal over. Outward appearance, it looks like it's doing quite well, but when you get onto the inside of it, you really look to see there's quite a lot of decay going on in there. So it's really important to make sure you go back and fix all those improper cuts to minimize the internal decay, because with that decay, then that branch becomes much weaker.
Okay, and when we see a broken branch on our tree, we want to go in there and make sure we cut it back to the right spot, because it doesn't always break properly.
That's correct.
Okay.
This is one that I use whenever I talk about proper pruning. This is where you want to make the cut just outside the branch collar here, and you make that pruning cut right there. This is an improper cut that we talk about. On this side over here, you can kind of get a sense where it was done right. Where you can see here, this used to be a branch right in here, and then it was either pruned or maybe it fell off or something, but all this new growth kind of happens right here, and it sealed off that open wound. And with a proper pruning cut, if you were to make this proper pruning cut right here, in time it would seal over just like this, and internal problems will be minimized.
Okay. Well, we've looked at an improper cut on this tree, but we have a proper cut.
Yeah,
Let's
we have
go
some
ahead
good
and look
stuff
at
going
that.
on over here too. Here's one that's getting a little closer to what we would like to see. It probably could have been made one more cut right here to you know, to not have this ridge in it right here, but it's not behind the branch collar. It's starting to callus over. You will notice though that it's starting to sucker right there next to it. And even if you make every single cut at the right location and do it properly, if too much of the tree or too much of the leaves of the tree are lost, you will see some suckering, and that's what's happened in this case. We lost over 50% of the crown, so the tree is just sending these sprouts up all throughout it. If you see something like this, the second year you would want to go ahead and continue to prune those back, because they're just draining nutrients out of the tree.
So is that something we'll want to do late winter this
I would
year?
do that late winter during the dormant season. That's right. And here's a place where we did some good things over here. This is what we hope to eventually all these trees, branches will look like. You have this nice callus tissue all the way across there. It's closed off. You can see they didn't cut into the branch bark ridge and the branch collar there. There's a little bit of a mound, and that's okay, but this is completely sealed over, and that's what we hope the rest of these branches, or at least the ones done correctly, are going to look like, because once they close off, there's going to be you know, no problems getting into the tree there.
Excellent. Well, pruning to recover from this ice damage is certainly a long-term process.
Yeah, it is.
But another, I guess, approach might be planning ahead as well. We're entering the fall, a great time to plant our trees. And there's perhaps some things we could do with proper tree selection, choosing a very well-structured tree. So why don't we go take a look at perhaps some avoidance strategies.
All right.
Well, Mark, as we've looked at a variety of damage on trees, have you seen that perhaps some species are better able to withstand the ice storms?
Yeah, it seemed like what we were seeing is a lot of the more what we call faster growing trees, weaker wooded, or those are the ones that we saw a lot of damage to. Lacebark elm is one that we saw that had some damage to it. Different willows had some problems, even though the one willow kind of proved us wrong there.
Yeah.
Different maples. The silver maple was one that we saw some damage to. Pecans, believe it or not. We would normally think of a pecan tree as really being a strong tree. We saw some pecan trees that had some damage to them. But just because they're a tree that may have what we might think less ice resistance to them, and doesn't mean that, without some proper care you can improve the chances of that tree doing well.
Okay. Now, what are some of the species that maybe are a little bit tougher?
Well, some of the ones that we saw, of course, were like the one that we just saw was the bald cypress. And a lot of times it's the shape of the tree, the form of the tree that causes it to be a little bit more ice resistant like that. The branching structure, for instance, how those branches come out of the main trunk of the tree, if it has that real U shape or tight branching pattern to it, more of a opportunity for them to crash down with the ice load, whereas the bald cypress, it has more of an open shape to it. It's more of a conical shape too. We saw some trees that were conical shaped that kind of fared quite well. Bald cypress being one. The sweet gum is one that we kind of had mixed results. It's supposed to be a stronger tree in that sense because of its shape, but in some places we saw some damage with it too. So sometimes then I would think that would get back towards more of taking care of your trees right now. That's what you can do is if you haven't had them pruned or taken care of, by doing more of that, there's going to be less chance that when the next ice storm comes through that you're going to have some problems. Other trees that did well are the Kentucky coffee tree is one, bur oak, and some of the slower going trees did real well. Chinese pistache, we see that all over. That's one that did quite well as well.
Wonderful. Well, as we think about selecting trees for the landscape, what are some things that we want to look for as we're purchasing that tree that maybe will help us have greater success?
Yeah, that's the thing. No matter what tree you choose, you want to just make sure of look at a few different things. This happens to be a Chinese pistache, and it's one of the ones that did quite well. And you can see on the main trunk of it, it's real nice, it's straight, it's clean, there's no damage to it, there's no nicks in the bark, so that would be something first to look at, is look at the overall shape of it. Secondly, you can kind of get a sense that it has real good symmetry all around the main crown of the tree. And so that means there's equal branches kind of spreading out in equal directions, and so it's going to have a nice kind of a real symmetrical shape to it. The other thing to look at is the branching union on it. This has some real good branch angles here. It comes out. It's not real upright, so it has a stronger branching angle on it. And so just look real closely at whatever tree you decide, a few little things like that. Make sure there's some symmetry to it. Look at the branch angles. Make sure the trunk is nice and straight and clean and free of damage or any kind of diseases or things like that. And if you start young like that, then the chances of it having future problems are much more reduced. If you do happen to pick a plant, a young tree, or it's been in the ground a few years and you start noticing some of those things, start when they're small. And just when you put a tree in the ground, you just can't forget about it. I know it's a lot of times we just put it in the ground, forget about it, everything should be just fine. Well, that's not really the case. It's like anything. You just need some ongoing maintenance to minimize those future threats.
So even when we find a tree that has a nice structure early on, there's going to be continual pruning that we need to do to shape it and continue to maintain that strength.
Yeah, that's right.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah. As we're traveling around the state in the ice storm area, we're continuing to see some problems on trees, including right here on our lab tree. What happened last year is that when the ice was on it, it caused small cracks that we weren't able to really see. Once the sap came up the tree and the leaves started forming, more weight was on that branch, and this particular branch broke on that. In some cases, it's so severe that you have the branch completely just strip off and come apart. And I think we're going to probably still continue to see that for a couple more years to come. And finally, there's some surprises that we're seeing. One of the things that we've been talking about is patience. In a lot of cases, you might have seen a tree that you would have thought never would have survived from that, and certainly we've seen that. Some of the things that we just never would have thought would have ever happened, happened. In this particular case, there was a willow tree that was just totally devastated. I would have never ever had thought that it would come out. Probably should have come out, but it didn't. And look what the tree did. It is happy. So I'm encouraged to see that. Again, just be patient, and who knows, sometimes nature throws a curveball at you.